Good morning or afternoon, depending on when you're watching this video. I just wanted to go through the Nearpod introduction activity, the graphing activity, just kind of show you a key. I'll post it later today in case you're confused by the activity. Hopefully you weren't. Hopefully you understand graphs well enough. But we'll let this load up. So again, it's the Nearpod activity. It is not the slides. Hopefully yours loads a little quicker than mine does. Well, wait, I'll show you a little magic. Ready? Ready? Now watch closely. Now watch closely. Ready? Impressive, huh? All right, come on. Load up. All right, so again, always first name, last name, first initial, or first and last name. Please put both. Again, these are the slides we did in class, so you shouldn't be too confused by it. We're talking about how we draw pictures with data. We talked about bar graphs, line graphs, and pie graphs, or pie charts. We remember that bar graphs are used when we are comparing objects. For comparing objects that are like separate objects usually. Then it asks you a quiz. Okay, so based on the bar graph, what is the most common school supply students use? So I click on the graph and I see that the tallest bar is pencil. So the most students use pencil. So I would go ahead and choose pencil as my response. Move my thing up here. I'll move over here. And I would make sure I submit. And it'll tell me if I got it right or not. Yay, I got it right. I'm so smart. Then line graphs used to show changes over time. Again, so line graph shows individual activities or one thing, but it shows its progression over time. The key is kind of like timeline. And then it's going to ask you, at what time was it the hottest? So if I look at this and I look at my timeline, the hottest point was roughly around 4 o'clock, the highest point of my line graph. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 4 o'clock because that was my highest time. Okay. Pie graph, remember it's parts of a whole. The key thing about a pie graph is if you see the percentages there, you should definitely know it's a pie graph. Okay, so based on the pie chart, what is the least favorite pizza topping? So if I look at my pie chart, the smallest section is the Supreme pizza. So I'm going to say the Supreme is the least popular topping. When we graph scientific data, we graph the independent variable on the x-axis, the dependent variable on the y-axis. Remember, we label. X-axis is what we changed. The y-axis is easy to remember. It's a y, capital Y has a vertical line to it. It's the vertical line. And we label what the units are as well. Okay, we've gone through these. We talked about how the graph and table looked compared to each other and said we had, based on these figures, they show different, which was easier to understand. We said it was the graph was easier to understand because it was easier to compare groups. Yep, and I should have made this all one quiz. I apologize. It's asking you a bunch of different stuff, but that's fine. Then it asks you if I needed the exact number of students who were to be, excuse me, a B. Wow. It's because I use the table, because the table gives me exact numbers. Okay. Then it asked me to graph it. Again, we talked about this. We showed how like this data can be represented as two different kinds of graphs. One is a little easier for showing trends. One just shows a comparison. I could also use the line graph. I would almost always stick with a bar graph if I'm comparing different objects. And then finally, I want you to choose, if I'm going to give you the data, what graph would you use to represent it? So if I have, what type of graph would I use to represent this data? So if I see this graph, it talks about the number of pennies that are minted in each year, and I see percentages. Well, as soon as I see percentages, I should know. It's not a bar graph. It's not comparing years. It's not a line graph. It's not showing. It does show changes over time, but it's really showing the percentage, how many are minted. So that would be parts of a whole, or I would submit that. That would be parts of a whole. I guess we could also make the argument for line graph because it is showing how it changes over time. but a pie graph would show me overall how many pennies were minted and when they were minted. Then, what kind of graph would you use to compare the favorite vegetables? So, I have favorite vegetables: broccoli, carrots, corn, peas, and squash. Brussels sprouts not on the list. How can that be? So, I'm comparing objects. As soon as I hear the word compare, bar graph, because it shows comparison between items, that is my response. It's not showing changes over time. It's not showing parts of a whole. So it's comparing. So that is going to be a bar graph. And I believe this is finally your last question. What type of graph represents this data? So I'm showing the time at a location and the temperature and how it changes over time. Well, as soon as I see that it changes over time, I should know it's a line graph. Remember, time line. Submit. And when you are done, you should see tab start over. Your score will be recorded, and there's nothing else for you to do. Hopefully this makes you understand graphs a little bit better, or at least helps you understand the key to the Nearpod. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Go Mustangs. And watch me try and click off my computer. There we go.